Welcome everyone to Career Success Strategies for Women in Tech, Truths and Myths. My name is Joseph Blancas and I serve as an Assistant Director of Alumni Career Engagement at UCLA Alumni Affairs. On behalf of UCLA Alumni Affairs, we welcome you to today's event. The Career Coaches Network series is made possible by the support of our sustaining donors. So we want to thank those of you who have made a donation to keep our program going throughout the year. Your UCLA Alumni Association is committed to strengthening the Bruin community with programs like this. The UCLA Alumni Association seeks to bring together our amazing alumni and friends of UCLA to help us navigate complicated and interesting topics. The Career Coaches series will feature career experts from our Career Coaches Network who will be addressing a variety of career development topics. For today's session, career coach Marge will demystify the myths and shed lights on the truth about being a woman in the tech industry. Marge is a career management and leadership development coach at the UCLA Anderson Professional MBA Career Management Center. She is focused on helping career professionals build confidence, develop leadership skills, and sustain rewarding careers. She specializes in career pivots, helping clients make successful transitions and adapt to a fast-changing business environment. Marge also empowers clients to navigate corporate life successfully, from developing effective cross-functional team leadership skills to influencing without authority and managing up. Her mission is driven by her own career pivots and corporate leadership experience. With that all being said, I turn the session over to Marge.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that introduction. I'm going to now share my screen, so just give me a second here while I do that. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Joseph, for introducing me and bringing me here. It's a real pleasure, and welcome everybody to Career Strategies for Women in Tech, Myths and Truths. And I'm very happy to be here with you today and share what I know about based on my own experience and from working with clients and my 20 or so years working in tech. So I actually come from a tech background myself. I've worked in Fortune 500 and tech startups for over 20 years. And my passions, not necessarily in this order, coaching, marketing, and tech. So I've pretty much lived in the tech world for most of my career, startups, Fortune 500, across different industries. I've made many pivots myself, and that's one of my areas of expertise or focus anyway, is pivoting through within tech and also in and out of tech. I'm an executive coach. I have my own practice called Blue Monk Leadership. And I'm also a staff coach at the UCLA Anderson Professional MBA program. I do focus on career pivots and strategies. I help my clients on leadership development, everything from navigating corporate life, working across cultures, cross-functional teams, all of the above, and then even more than that. So I really enjoy coaching. I love helping my clients cope with all kinds of challenges they have in their careers, in the workplace, coping with everything from surprises, unexpected surprises, and pitfalls. So basically, help them understand that they're not alone, they have support, and there's always a fresh perspective to help you get unstuck or to see clarity or gain confidence. Right, so what are we going to talk about today? So I'm going to share a few stats just to set the stage for where we are with women in tech today. And then we'll go into some of the kind of misconceptions, myths, hurdles, biases, and what are some truths, and share some insights and tips, hopefully some practical things that you could take away and in your own careers. And then we'll do a quick wrap up. So more specifically, what are some of the things that we're going to discuss? Some of those common misconceptions about career success in tech. We'll talk about some practical tips for pivoting into tech and within tech, and some insights to position yourself for success in a tech career, specifically coping with failure, taking risks, and also the power and impact of mentoring, which, by the way, January is National Mentoring Month, so very appropriate from a timing perspective here. All right, so let's take a quick poll. All right, so you can see here how many of you are actually working in tech, not in tech, but interested in breaking in, or just curious, or none of the above. Okay, it looks like most of you are around the middle, not in tech, but interested in breaking in, or just curious, and there's a proportion who are actually working in tech today. Okay, terrific, terrific. It's nice to see that kind of balance. All right, so thank you for that. Let's, with that, let's jump right in. So I'm going to share some stats now on how we're looking as far as women in tech, what the overall landscape looks like. So it's mixed news. So overall representation for women in tech. This particular study by the Anita B. Org, which is an organization focused on sustaining an equitable future for women in tech, they did a recent study that showed overall representation for women technologists. It's about 28.8% as of 2020. And it's been steadily growing. So year to year, 2019 to 2020, growth rate's about 5%. The year before that, much smaller. So the increase is promising, not great, not terrible. However, if this growth rate continues at the same rate, it would actually take 12 years to achieve equal representation, like the 50-50 representation. So that's a long time, right? And we'll say more about that in a second. Looking at representation by career level. So at each level from entry, mid, senior, executive level, there is a gradual rate of increase, which is good. It's trending up. A little bit more promising at the executive level, where the rate is actually a little bit higher than at the mid-senior levels. So this is just a quick snapshot to share with you in case you're wondering what that looks like level to level. So this next slide here talks about, it's a study by Accenture in partnership with an organization called Girls Who Code. And unfortunately, the actual proportion of women in tech roles has actually declined over the past 35 years. And a large reason for that is because 50% of women who take a tech role actually drop out by the time they reach the age of 35. And this stat is compared to the overall industry average of 20% if you compare across the board to all other jobs, non-tech jobs. So not great news, unfortunately. And a little bit more about this. So compared to 35 years ago, today the proportion of women in tech is actually at 32%, right? It was 35% back in 1984. And so unfortunately, the gender imbalance is much greater than it was 35 years ago. And also women are leaving tech at a 45% higher rate than men. And among some of the reasons cited are non-inclusive culture, including not having a path forward, unconscious bias, no role models, no mentors. And we'll talk some more about this later. And also the data shows that there aren't that many senior women executives or role models in the C-suite levels in the very large companies. And in fact, there are only 30% of women who are on boards. So let's dive right in. Now that we've seen a snapshot of women's representation in tech, let's take a deeper dive. So what are some of these misconceptions, hurdles, biases, and truths out there? So if you're looking to break into tech, as many of you are, what do you need to know? And if you're already in the industry and you're feeling perhaps overwhelmed or unsure, stressed, what can you do about it? So there's a lot of material we're going to cover. I'm just going to fly through it mostly instead of going deep. And you can ask me questions at the end or reach out to me separately after the webinar. So the first myth, I need coding skills to break into or be successful in tech. Actually, there are many paths into and within tech. Obviously, besides being an engineer, there's product management, which is somewhat of a hybrid between being on the business side and on the technical side. There's marketing, design, sales, operations, and finance. So there's a number of different ways that you can break into tech. And in fact, rather than strict coding skills per se, it's more important to have what I'll call a conceptual mindset, having a sense of how products are made, how products are developed, knowing about best practices and trends and everything from data analytics and cloud technology and product design. After all, better products are built by with a diversity of different ideas. So if you look at it from that perspective, women and underrepresented groups actually have a lot to contribute here. So there's a lot of opportunity for women to break into tech. In fact, women are often the first to spot gaps in human aspects that keep tech from delivering its promise. In areas like artificial intelligence, AI, for example, it's been known that there's a critical lack of representation by women here. And this actually has dire consequences because AI is supposed to, or it's meant to simulate human behaviors and interactions. So without diverse interests represented, AI would really fail to serve the general population. So women's contributions are actually very much welcome and valued, and it's going to be in the next decades to come. So that's certainly not to be overlooked. So just a couple of case studies I wanted to share that show that it's possible, entirely possible, to have a very successful career in tech without coding skills or technical skills. The first example here, Fiji Simo, she's actually currently an Instacart CEO, and she spent many years before that at Facebook and prior to that at eBay. So she came from a very interesting, humble background, small town in France. She was first in her family to graduate high school. She actually, her last year in business school was at UCLA Anderson. So she came from a business background when she joined eBay and then subsequently Facebook. She joined as a pure marketer, and then she moved into product management, despite the fact that 82% of Facebook's product managers have computer science degrees. So how did she do that? She actually taught herself how to write product requirement documents, and she proved that she could learn really, really quickly. So this, in addition to her superb product strategy skills, were what led to her eventual success as head of the Facebook app. Second example is Adrienne Weissman. She actually is Chief Growth Officer at a company called the Coda Collection. It's a digital entertainment platform. She's held several sales and marketing roles at various companies, LinkedIn, Google, and she actually advocates learning some key skills in lieu of coding. So not coding per se, but things like SQL, pivot tables in Excel, learning how to create basic landing pages. So generally being adaptable and allowing yourself to learn some new skills so that you can be as self-sufficient as possible. And for example, be able to pull your own numbers or data queries with SQL rather than asking somebody else to do the numbers for you. So it's really all about being self-sufficient, being adaptable, and learning how to do things yourself. That really is one of the key skills to have in tech. So let's go into myth number 2, that it's too late to pivot into tech at a mid or late stage career. Actually not true. And while there's a perception that experienced workers have a harder time in the hiring process, it's not entirely possible. You'll see from the data here on this slide that the median ages are late 30s, early 40s. There are also IT workers in their 50s and 60s in tech. And this, of course, is a very narrow segment just on developers and IT. It doesn't cover the wide spectrum, but this is just to show that there's actually a fairly broad spectrum as far as age goes. I actually joined my first startup in my early 40s, and I continued to work for startups in subsequent years, and I was always able to land good senior level marketing roles. And in most cases, many of my bosses were hired around the same time as I was, and some of them were were older as well and more senior than me and more experienced. So it's certainly not an issue as long as you have the right skills and you're willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work and learn how to do some new things. So that's the good news. So perception is really key. So as I was mentioned earlier today, or earlier in the previous slide, for myself and several of my colleagues, really it's all about showing your adaptability, agility, and energy as you learn or pick up some of these new skills and on the job, right? So for instance, at interviews, that's a good chance for you to show and demonstrate your adaptability. What new tech skills have you learned? For example, one of my clients was interviewing for a product marketing role at Adobe, and she brought to the interview a digital ebook or PDF that she designed for a friend using Adobe Suite. She was a real novice at this, but she showed that she learned to pick it up on her own and was able to show an actual example of, here I'm willing to learn and whatever it takes. So, and also showing fluency with current tech software platforms. It could be anything, even from Google Suite. For many years, I lived in the Microsoft world, and when I joined a startup a few years ago, I actually had to learn to be fluent in Google Suite, everything from team collaboration to doing slides on the Google Suite, right? So being able to use different platforms and showing some fluency with that, or just your ability to pick up and learn things, that's really what it's all about, rather than having specific knowledge about coding or any one particular thing. So myth number 3, I don't have direct experience in my target focus area, therefore it's impossible for me to break into tech. So actually the truth here is that everyone actually has transferable skills, and you'd be surprised. If you start to inventory your entire body of work, you'll find that you actually have more skills that you can adapt and transfer into your desired job or your target job. And what you need to do is understand, where is it that you want to go? What are some of those skills you need to have? What skills do you already have now? And where is the gap? What does that gap look like? And what do you need to do to gain some of those skills? For instance, if you want to be a product manager and you don't have, for instance, cloud software background, let's say you're aiming for a job in cloud software, a product manager job in cloud software, but then you look back at your skill set that you've built from prior jobs and prior roles, and see that you've actually worked with customers and you have good customer facing skills. You've got good project management skills. You know how to manage resources and deliver projects on time. You've got good analytical skills, communication skills, and you can influence without authority. All those things are actually a major part of becoming a successful product manager. So it really comes down to being able to tell your story. What are your motivations? What are you passionate about? So it's not just about your skills and being able to articulate why you, what do you bring to the table? What's unique about you? So we talked about skills a lot. So certainly skill up if you see the gaps and have the opportunity to do projects to fill those gaps, take online classes, or volunteering for projects at work. That's really, really very important. A great opportunity there. Sometimes raising your hand to volunteer for a task force even that no one wants to volunteer for or do could open doors for you, a great way to be visible, to learn about a new particular area. Perhaps that's a lateral move in the future that you could move into. Another way is to try to land a role in a smaller tech company. Let's say you worked at a larger firm, in a well-known firm in operations, and you want to work as a product manager, right? So landing at a smaller firm that may value your large company experience and be willing to hire you as a product manager, that actually, you might have a pretty good likelihood of that, assuming you can demonstrate what you're going to bring to the table and why you'd be successful. And then once you're there, just learn as much as you can about best practices and processes and what you need to be successful. Then it's a much easier move into your ideal company, let's say. And of course, it's all about networking and who you know. So contacting prior bosses, colleagues, or partners. Those people are more likely to hire you without direct experience because it's based on the relationship that you'd had with them in the past. And there's already that existing trust and credibility that you've gained from that prior relationship. All right, so myth number 4. There's actually 7 myths total, in case you're wondering kind of how far off we are from all the myths. So myth number 4 is, so let's shift gears a little bit. So far we've been talking about breaking into tech. So for some of you who already are in tech, what are some of the misconceptions out there that you faced? What's the truth behind them? And how can you cope? What are some things you need to know? So there's actually this report that was published by a company called Trust Radius in 2021 that discusses some new stats on gender equality in tech, including some barriers to promotion. And this particular chart shows that among the largest factors is not having a clear path forward. So women aren't seeing, because there aren't a lot of women in the C-suite and senior executive roles, that they're not seeing a future for them. And second largest one is about mentoring. So we're going to talk about mentoring a little bit more later. A lack of mentorship, so that it goes into helping, they're not able to visualize themselves as a head of marketing or head of product because there are no other women in those roles. So that's a known big barrier. Among the things is more, call your attention to this center part of the chart. This is where we get into unconscious bias. So there's gender bias, racial bias, and a common perception of a lack of trust in your abilities. A lot of women feel that their seniority is being questioned, that they're perceived to be less senior than they actually are. So this next slide is a similar, but addressing women of color. So for women of color, many of the numbers and the reasons are very similar, with lack of budget, unconscious bias playing a huge part, and a lack of trust also having more impact on reasons they don't get promoted. So let's talk about unconscious bias for a minute. Unconscious bias, just to kind of level set, it's so just by definition, they're social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness. So everyone, we're all guilty of this. We all do. It's just based on our family culture. It's based on our environment. It's based on all the experiences we're exposed to, right? So and I mentioned bro culture here because this is something that many of you may be aware of. It's still quite pervasive in the tech industry. However, it's really about unconscious bias, and that's really what creates invisible hurdles for women at all career levels. For instance, a couple of common examples, likability penalties for women versus men. Women or men actually, we meaning women and men, because we're all guilty of it, tend to like men who get promoted. They're seen as more likable leaders, and this is all based on research. But we like women less when they're promoted. So that has been proven to happen. And then there's also things like Zoom bombing, for example, when a child pops up during a Zoom call, a business Zoom call. And research actually shows that when a man is interrupted at work by kids, they're viewed favorably. It's like it actually elevates their brand, like, oh, what an adorable dad. However, for women unfortunately are not perceived to be good leaders, and it actually degrades their brand. So it tends to trigger everyone's unconscious bias. There's also affinity bias or social isolation. Men like to hang out with other men socially, for instance, and it's a comfort level thing. And what tends to happen then is women can miss out on some key opportunities, even things like, the parking lot conversations, or, just really informal channels of communication. And what happens then with these patterns and trends with unconscious bias is that it creates a very non-inclusive workplace culture, which is one of the reasons that women leave their companies. So another study by Accenture also shows the same thing, that this actually shows some of the same key attributes that women experience in non-inclusive work cultures. And you can see here the way the chart is divided up. The numbers in purple track the more inclusive workplace cultures, and the numbers are extremely high. Most of the women love their jobs. They have a higher likelihood of being promoted. They don't experience the perception problem of being perceived as less senior than their male peers. However, compared to the less inclusive cultures, it indexes a lot higher. So, the conclusion here is that more inclusive cultures help women thrive in the workplace and actually stay in the workplace. So here's another cut at the data that and note the 20% probability of advancement between the least inclusive and the most inclusive companies. You can see here the difference, how it pulls away. So having a more inclusive culture actually helps women advance, a higher likelihood of advancement. What are some of the things that tech companies are doing to support women in tech, given how unconscious bias impacts women's staying in the workforce and also being promoted? So some of the things like offering equal maternity and paternity leave and encouraging actually, men and women to take leave, right? So it's not just a woman, but both genders, and that has to be role modeled by senior executives as well. It really has to be supported and come from the top. So need to walk the talk. And the second thing here is conducting more unconscious bias training. So driving greater awareness to drive that more inclusive office culture. Many of you have probably heard about this already. This is already going on in many tech workplaces. Just doing more inclusive, it can include things like more inclusive networking, like making networking events accessible to everybody and doing it only during normal working hours, not outside of normal working hours, just to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. And then, of course, providing more mentorship opportunities for women, employee networks, support groups, just to give women the chance to feel more affinity, a community, a supportive community, and a supportive environment, a safe place really for them to share their experiences. And then, of course, promoting more women in leadership so they actually see a path forward and can envision themselves in those roles. So I wanted to share a quick snapshot of, obviously, success in diversity, equity, and inclusion means having executive sponsors. So these are 3 examples among the many others, 3 examples of senior executives who are leading the way in their own companies to make sure that women have an equal chance of succeeding in the workplace. So Ann Chow, she's CEO and head of the AT&T business unit. She actually has faced a lot of racial bias throughout her career, and she's now using her platform to increase women's leadership representation at AT&T. She's actually been very successful, and thanks to her efforts, over 400 women of color have expanded their professional opportunities within the company or been promoted. Bina Amanath, she's actually executive director at Global AI Institute at Deloitte. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a critical lack of diverse perspectives in AI because of the unequal representation of women in AI. So she's working hard to make sure that to increase the support for women in AI and on their path to leadership. Finally, Barbara Wise, she actually spent many years leading the diversity and inclusion programs at Intel, and then she transitioned into Apple, a very similar type of role. She's trying to bring DEI into every system at Apple. So clearly, success in these initiatives means having that executive sponsor completely behind it and having metrics to track success. So just a snapshot of which companies have strong DEI programs, either already started or been doing this for a long time. There are companies like HP and Cisco who are, just legendary for being women-friendly workplaces. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff has some very aggressive goals to make sure that women are equally represented. So the news is good. Things are getting better across the board. Obviously, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but things are happening and progressing. So we talked earlier about mentoring and this being National Mentorship Month. So mentoring, we saw from that Tech Radius report that the lack of mentorship is the second most important barrier to promotion, to women feeling able to be promoted, which is why mentoring matters. Earlier, we talked about social affinity bias, which leads to social isolation. If you're kept out of informal networks, you miss out on key information, key conversations, social events. Therefore, if you had a supportive community that creates a safe place for women to share similar experiences, that can actually reduce feelings of social isolation, which then minimizes feelings of imposter syndrome, which commonly is what causes women to leave tech. So how does mentoring help? Besides being able to offer advice related to specific jobs, it also provides that safe environment for women, right? And mentors can also help you navigate the hiring process, which is very critical for women in underrepresented groups. For instance, figuring out how to negotiate my compensation or salary. And if you had a network to guide you, a mentor, to guide you through that process, that can actually facilitate that process so you feel like you're on the right track and you feel that you're getting a good package. So in addition to mentoring, there's also, I call it your personal board of advisors. And really it's besides your mentor who can give you advice on your career and give you some guidance, there's also sponsors. For example, a sponsor in a company, these are people who can be your advocates. They believe in you and they can give you opportunities that you need to advance, maybe introduce you to certain key management, senior management, give you visibility. They know about projects coming up and they can advocate for you as a good team leader for a particular project. They can introduce you to their network. So these are really key people to have in addition to mentors, sponsors, and also the graphic on the right. It's a nice graphic that I wanted to share because really it's very holistic. So you have people like peers who are on kind of your allies and also your cheerleader. They'll support you and they'll make sure that they'll also give you honest feedback if you need it. There's a coach, someone like me. I work with clients on setting goals and also being their accountability partner. So really look at this holistically as having a whole team, kind of a support team on your side to help you kind of navigate your career and navigate your life. And this all contributes to your success and your mental well-being. Okay, so it's time for our second audience poll. I'm going to share the results here. So it looks like many of you are mixed. And then for some of you better, some worse. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. All right. I asked for this because this is going to lead us to our next slide, which is that during the pandemic, remote work was actually positive for women by providing more flexibility. I'm calling this a myth, even though there's data that indicates otherwise, that many people prefer remote work, the flexibility that it affords. But let's look at the data in a second. So a study that McKinsey made last year, actually, this is very recent data, showed that women were actually making gains in representation. And this is actually, full disclosure, this is across the board, not just in tech, but all industries. So roughly, so for every 100 men who were promoted, there were 85 women who were promoted to manager levels. So that's getting pretty close to parity there, right? So that's the good news. However, the bad news is over the course of the last 2 years, the burnout rate has actually escalated at a much faster rate among women. So the burnout, stress, and exhaustion continue to affect more women than men. In this next slide, by trust radius, that same other study that we were looking at, this particular study showed that most women actually said they feel more burnt out, they've been working more overtime, and they took on more responsibility at work. So there's increased responsibility, working more overtime, and generally more pressure to be productive. So according to these studies, actually, women faced historic challenges in 2021 and were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And in addition to that, women have been twice as likely as men to have lost their jobs or been furloughed during the pandemic. So the actual number actually is about 3 million women in the US have left the workforce, either due to layoffs or choosing to leave their jobs as a result of the added stress and the added responsibilities. So based on this data, actually, it shows that the pandemic has actually accelerated burnout, which is unfortunate, just as women across the board, the representation numbers were starting to go up. COVID has then put a spotlight on what's known as the broken rung in the corporate ladder. And what that means is the broken rung actually is a term that's being used to refer to the barriers to women being promoted. So, the pandemic has only made that worse you see 1 in 3 women considering downshifting or leaving the workforce versus 1 in 4 who said this at the start of the pandemic. So the actual numbers show that they're following through on leaving their companies or switching jobs. This is a great quote by Ursula Burns, former chair and CEO of Xerox. And what she says is, while she was never a real, kind of super genius or super brain, but she was always prepared, she was good at what she did. And what really made the difference for her was being known, seen, and heard in her corporate environment. And however, working from home during the COVID era has made out of sight, out of mind more acute, especially for women and people of color. So women have had to work twice as hard to be known, seen, and heard. So remote work actually is not a positive. I'm going to pause here for just a second. And then, so now we're getting into the last 2 myths. So this myth is that women lack ambition compared to men. I know that's a very kind of overall big statement there. And we know that women are actually equally ambitious. However, what they need is a confidence boost. So there's that confidence gap that some of you may or may not have heard of. And examples, men in general tend to sign up for opportunities and things way sooner than women do. So for example, for jobs, men tend to apply for a job even when they only meet 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet 100%. It's often, oh, I'm not qualified, I'm not ready, I don't have all the qualifications, I'm gonna get rejected. And And we know this is kind of almost general knowledge that research shows that men are promoted based on potential and women on performance, that we have to prove ourselves harder or work harder just to be promoted. So this leads into kind of our next section about taking risks and failing. So one of the reasons for the confidence gap is that women tend to be more cautious about taking risks and failing. So the notion of being perfect and, you know, everything, you need to cross the T's and dot the I's, everything just has to be perfect before, you know, you think very carefully before you say something at a meeting, right? All these things that lead to women being perceived as maybe less ambitious or less confident. I wanted to share this great quote by Anne Mukherjee. She's CEO of Pernod Ricard North America, and she is in the spirits industry. I wanted to share this because it's a very male-dominated industry as well. And she's actually faced a lot of personal challenges in her own life. She came from an abusive marriage. She had a child with leukemia. So she, despite that, you know, still had a wonderful, fantastic career. And she says that for every failure is the secret to my success. And for every large failure in my life, it's been the S curve of my growth. So in her quote here, you say she says, don't be afraid to take smart risks and fail. It's in our imperfections that we find our greatness. So when you have that confidence in yourself, anything is possible. So that leads into my next section here, which is adopting a growth mindset. So instead of looking at it as, I mean, the failure is actually good. And what if you took that risk? Maybe you'll fail, maybe you won't, but take it as a learning, you know, so invest in a continuous learning type of mindset. Microsoft, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, he actually spent his first 6 years of his tenure there transforming the company culture from a know-it-all culture to a team of learn-it-alls, as they call it. So there's a great example of, you know, for him and his team, it meant putting aside their egos and letting it be not about being right or having the best idea, but what's best for the team. And really soliciting ideas and feedback from everyone in the team, because after all, the more ideas that are generated, the better the results, right? And teams that are much more engaged generate better results. So thinking about it that way from a growth mindset. Companies like Amazon, for example, they have a very similar mindset. Jeff Bezos has described life at Amazon as always day one. You know, they experiment, accept failures, plant seeds, protect saplings, and then double down when they see customer delight. You know, Amazon is a very customer-centric culture, as you know. So adopting that kind of growth mindset. So what if you see yourself as a company thinking that way? One of the key things I coach many clients with is imposter syndrome. So a lot of us you let that voice in your head take over. And what I advise clients or coach clients to do is to develop your voice. For instance, in meetings, you know, and learn to kind of build that and develop it. You know, you'll make mistakes, but that's totally fine, and that's part of the process. You've really earned your seat at the table, so use that voice. And also be willing to give and receive positive and negative feedback. So it goes both ways, and you look at it as an opportunity to grow. There's also partnering with your boss and colleagues for support at meetings, you know, building each other up and supporting each other at meetings and building on each other's comments, for instance. Just a quick word for introverts is, you know, introverts are, you know, and I work with many engineers, mostly introverts. Some of them are extroverts too, but most of them tend to be introverts. That's where you really have the opportunity to leverage those one-on-one relationships and kind of work the back channels in order to be successful. So it's just a very different dynamic, but it doesn't mean you can't be successful. And this is, I wanted to share again, part 2 of that quote by Ursula Burns earlier, where what really makes the difference is being known, seen, and heard. So it goes to developing your voice and working through that imposter syndrome and knowing that you actually have value to bring to the table. So don't be afraid of contributing and speaking up. Okay, so last myth, women aren't as skilled as men in salary negotiations. So the interesting data here, at least in technology and in STEM, is that neither gender, this is based on a very recent study by USC in October of last year, is that neither gender actually excels in negotiating for compensation. In fact, all men and women left room at the table. However, there is a gender gap when it comes to equity pay and stock options. So, but let's focus on women. In general, research by Harvard Business Review shows that 20% of women don't negotiate at all. In fact, of those who don't negotiate starting salaries, they'll forego an average of $7,000 in year one, and therefore lose up to $1 million over a 45-year career, which is pretty significant. The reason is women tend to view negotiations, it's like going to the dentist, we all dread it. However, for men in general, they view it as like winning a game or solving a problem, right? And there's also the social stigma and bias that works against women who advocate aggressively for themselves. So women have some things to overcome here in advocating more aggressively for themselves. So how do we get around this? How do you advocate for yourself? Ask for what you want and get it. Do your research, know your market value. That's at the very top here of the list. And be very sort of clear what unique attributes, what skills you bring to the table. How are you going to solve their problems? One way around advocating for yourself aggressively is say that you're looking out for the team. So this is something Sheryl Sandberg did. She made the case for how the company would benefit from her negotiating skills while she aggressively negotiated for her salary. So think about what it is you're bringing to the team and to the organization and how you're going to fill those gaps and how the company would benefit from your skills, your experience, and your leadership. So I'm going to wrap up as I see that we are getting close to time here. So just summing up all the things that we talked about. So embrace ambiguity, adopt resilience, have a growth mindset, learn new skills, be willing to roll up your sleeves, develop your voice and build that confidence. I know it sounds like a paradox, but it really is part of just taking smart risks and learning from it. Be a creative problem solver. So rather than seeing it as a trip to the dentist, how can you creatively think about this as a problem to solve as you think about negotiating for your salary or figuring out how to solve a problem together with the team. Mentorship, very important, as we talked about earlier. So seeking the right mentors or being one yourself, just to get the ball rolling. Anyone can be a mentor. Finally, just knowing yourself. So it's really important to be able to self-reflect and know what drives you, what are your passions and motivations as you think about setting up your career for the long term. Okay, I included some great books here and resources that you are free to take a screenshot because these are really excellent resources to read or to avail yourself of. The Strengths Finder quiz I highly recommend by Marcus Buckingham. That really helps you. It's a great mirror to how you show up in the world and how to leverage your strengths at work and in life, mostly work. It's more career oriented. All right, so if you have any questions at all about what we covered today or just coaching, I do offer a special rate for UCLA alums. If you're interested in career and leadership coaching, you can meet with me first for a 30-minute complimentary consultation, and then also any general questions you might have. You can either submit the form here in the link here or just send me an email. All right, here's my contact information, and I strongly encourage and invite you to follow us on my company LinkedIn site. So here's the link. And if you do that, you could be eligible to win a free 30-minute coaching session this month. All right, thank you very much. All right, and with that, let's go to questions.
All right, Marge, thank you so much. I'm gonna see what questions we have in so far. For everyone who's tuning in, if you would like to ask Marge a question, feel free to submit it via the Q&A function. I think we got a comment more than a question, but Alicia says, such great examples of women in leadership and their words, their mindset, and their focus. Thank you. She also shared she's a fan of Marcus Buckingham, and she's a provider and a connector. So she wanted to just thank you, Marge, for your presentation. We did get a comment in our registration, and it was not necessarily a question, but more so looking for advice for partnering with tech companies for community development and youth education. I don't think the participant was looking to pivot into the tech industry, but trying to figure out ways to collaborate and partner with them. Do you have any?
Yeah, there's I know all the big companies, the big tech companies, they all have community initiatives. And depending on what's important to them, I think education is generally at the top of that list. Like Intel, when I worked at Intel, they were big on education and community. So I would suggest if there are certain target companies, make a list and check out their social media and website. You'll find, you'll know very quickly what some of those initiatives are, what's important to them, what they're involved in. And then, there's usually a contact person there, somebody in charge of that particular community effort. So I would reach out that way, and social media. I mean, there's always reaching out through social media. You could DM them, just reach out directly.
Great, thank you. I have another question for you. I know you shared myths, but what would you say would be the #1 challenge when trying to pivot into the tech industry?
Yeah, I think it's really about, people think that you need, hard skills, like technical skills, when it's really, your body of work. So I talked about a lot of transferable skills. We all have transferable skills that we can bring to the table. And, surprisingly or not, it's those soft skills that matter more increasingly, I think, in our world, which has changed so quickly in the last 2 years, as we've seen. So it's about being adaptable, having that growth mindset, just being willing to learn, roll up your sleeves and learn new things. That's really the key there, is just having that right mindset and the right attitude as you go in.
Yeah, and I think working with a coach like you to be able to articulate what those skills are and how they could be helpful in the pivot. We just received a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any suggestions for how to find a mentor if you are freelancing in tech?
Yeah, besides looking in your network, there are also industry groups. Like if there's a particular area in UX, there are industry groups that specialize in that. So look on LinkedIn, for example, on social media. There are always forums and groups that you can join or follow. If there's a particular member of that group that posts a lot, that looks like they're very knowledgeable about a particular area, feel free to reach out to them too, or comment. Start just maybe commenting on some of their posts to show who you are, and show that you've given it some thought. You're trying to make yourself visible, right? So that's one way to go about it. And there's also through your own network. any second degree connections, people you know, or who can introduce you to someone in your target industry. That's another way that you could look at it. Yeah, so I would say mainly through networking and joining some of these industry groups and forums.
Great. Well, if anyone has any further questions for Marge, feel free to submit them. Marge, if it's okay, I'm going to just throw in your email
Sure.
and a website into the chat just for anyone if they're interested. In
Yeah, thank you.
as well as your LinkedIn, just so that people have that for after the webinar. As a reminder, we have recorded this webinar and we'll be sharing it out in a follow-up email along with the slides from today's presentation. Looks like we haven't had any other questions come in. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and end our webinar a few minutes early. Marge, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We greatly appreciate it. It was so informative and helpful. I want to thank our UCLA Alumni Affairs Department for helping to facilitate this event. And we hope that everyone joins us for our future Career Coaches Network sessions. Thank you, and go Bruins.
Thank you. Go Bruins.